Hello and welcome. Welcome, everyone. I am so excited to welcome you to today's conversation with noted author Jane Smiley. My name is Beth Spotswood. I'm the digital editor of Alta Journal and the host of Alta Live. Again, it is just such a treat to welcome you all. I see our Zoom room filming in. I know we've got a big crowd today. Do let us know in the chat where you're zooming in from. It's always fun to see where folks are coming from. A little bit about our guests today. Jane Smiley probably needs no introduction, but I'm going to give her one anyway. She's a Los Angeles native. Her novel, 1,000 Acres, won the Pulitzer Prize and National Book
I
Critics.
have to correct one thing, though. I was born in Los Angeles, but I was moved to St. Louis when I was a year old, so I don't have any memories of Los Angeles.
On behalf of Alta, you count as a California native, and we embrace and celebrate that about you. But thank you for the factual check. Thank you. Still a Californian in my book. Her novel, The All True Travels and Adventures of Lyde Newton, won the 1999 Spur Award for Best Novel of the West. Her novel, Horse Heaven, was shortlisted for the Orange Prize in 2002. Her novel, Some Luck, was longlisted for the 2014 National Book Award. She's been a member of the American Academy of Arts and Letters since 1987 and has written for numerous magazines and newspapers, including The New Yorker, The New York Times, Harper's, and The Nation. Her most recent novel, A Dangerous Business, was published in 2002, and she lives in Carmel Valley, California. Jane will be in conversation with Alta's editorial director, Blaise Zerega. Blaise's journalism has appeared in Condé Nast Portfolio, where he was deputy editor and part of the founding team. Wired, Blaise was managing editor of Wired, The New Yorker, Forbes, and other publications. Additionally, Blaise was the editor of Red Herring magazine, once the Bible of Silicon Valley. Throughout his career, he has helped lead teams small and large to numerous honors, including multiple national magazine awards. Blaise is also a voracious reader and a passionate fan of authors, as you will note today. Before we begin, some brief housekeeping. Alta Live is the digital interview series we do here at Alta Journal. If you are unfamiliar with Alta, we are an award-winning quarterly magazine and website focused on California and the West. You can join us for a member for as little as $3 a month and support the work we do, including our monthly California book club, which is free and very fun to join. In fact, next month, we're welcoming Percival Everett to discuss his book, Telephone. We also present weekly events like this one today. If you haven't yet joined Alta as a member and have been considering it, now is the time to join. You get a free hat, you get our West Coast bookstore guide, you get 4 issues of Alta, all for $50 a year. So I do hope you'll consider joining us as a member. This interview will be recorded and posted to altaonline.com later this afternoon. Blaise and Jane will chat for about 30 minutes. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of our screen. Please use that to add any questions you have for our guests today, and we'll get to those at about 1 o'clock today. We will send you a link to this interview, as well as links to where you can buy Jane's book, where you can check out Alta, where you can see Jane in conversation with Blaise at the upcoming Bay Area Book Festival, and more. With that, I'm going to get lost and turn this over to my boss, Blaise, and the wonderful Jane Smiley. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Gosh, that was fun. Good. Jane, it's such an honor to be here today with you. Thank you for joining us. And today we're going to be talking about your new book. I'm going to hold up close because this is just a great fun cover. It's titled "The Questions That Matter Most: Reading, Writing, and the Exercise of Freedom." Topics that should ring near and dear to everyone's heart, particularly at this moment. And what makes today doubly special is the book is actually not out until June. So you can, think of this as like a advanced screening, a sneak peek, something like that. And I was lucky to get my copy at the LA Times Book Festival this past weekend. And perhaps, and as Beth mentioned, we're going to be at the Bay Area Book Festival in 2 weeks' time, May 6th and 7th, and maybe there'll be a copy there. But this weekend is also Independent Bookstore Weekend, Bookstore Day. So please go to your local indie bookstore, pre-order it, or pick one up in Berkeley. So I just want to ask Jane, first of all, I love this photo. I'm going to show it to everyone. It's so fun. And I kept thinking there used to be these posters like in, I don't know, when I was in high school or college, something like that, where they had the, the person in the bathtub full of money, or drinking the bathtub full of champagne, the good life. And how did this photo come about? Is this the
Well,
good one?
I think that was the photo. That's a pretty old photo. I think it was taken for 13 Ways of Looking at the Novel, which was a book that I wrote about the history and the nature of the novel. And I remember the photographer came and we were talking, and I pointed out that I did most of my reading in the bathtub. So it came to us that I should go. I do not drink wine. That should have been a Diet Coke in the picture.
Well, you've got your clothes on too. So
Yeah.
it was staged.
But we filled the bathtub with the books that I'd read for 13 Ways, and I climbed in and
That's I love it because we on their own, reading, writing, the exercise of freedom, the questions that matter most can be very serious, but this is it indicates this is going to be fun, and it's truly a delight. This book, I just can't recommend it enough. And also, Jane already mentioned the 2005 13 Ways of Looking at the Novel. Mm-hmm. Add that to your to read list too, everybody. So I think that sometimes with a book that people haven't had a chance to read yet, one of the best ways to begin a conversation is actually to ask you if you wouldn't mind to read.
Not at all.
From the beginning, just right from the introduction. I think it'd be fun and sort of set the stage of some of the things we talk about. Please.
Before I came to California, the only California writer I knew much about was John Steinbeck from Salinas, who, judging by his works, was interested not only in the social world and the history of his native land, but also in the landscape. In my favorite of his novels, East of Eden, he begins by describing the diversity of the Salinas Valley, the lupins and the poppies, the trees and the Spanish moss, the changing nature of the soil, and the danger and beauty of the Salinas River. All of his works take on economic and political themes too, obviously in The Grapes of Wrath and Of Mice and Men. But one of the things you can't help doing if you're a writer based in California is attempting to convey what it feels like to be here moment by moment. My family had one small connection to California. One of my grandfather's many older sisters ended up in Vallejo, married to an astronomer who was a true crackpot and who was also from central Missouri. His name was Thomas Jefferson Jackson C., and he earned his stripes as a crackpot by ruthlessly opposing Einstein's theory of relativity until the day he died, convinced that the universe was made of ether. He worked for the US Navy and was sent to Mare Island to use astronomy to tell the exact time of day and to let the captains of the ships know so that they could embark on their missions in the proper way. And so I went to Vallejo and Mare Island to look around, gathering the information I needed to write Private Life, which was published in 2010. I also discovered a blot on US and California history that I hadn't known about: the internment of the Japanese during World War II. If you grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, or elsewhere in Missouri, slavery and abolition and segregation were frequent topics of conversation. What I learned about my great aunt taught me more about the complicated history of California and more about the complicated history of my family.
All right. Well, thank you. I mean, I love that section. And I think it's something that we've been working on at Alta with our California book club, where the sense that there's people when they, and you go on to describe this too, I think that you know, in your formative years, high school, college, you're sort of taught David Copperfield, and no offense to Charles Dickens, I know we both fans of him, but you're not taught, you know, Octavia Butler, for instance.
Right.
You mentioned Kindred, or two of the books that we were lucky to have authors from the California Book Club, Paul Beatty.
Oh, I love that book. And my students love that book too. I taught that book at UC Riverside, and that was totally one of their favorites.
Yeah, and Maxine Hahn Kingston.
And they like that one too.
Yeah, and so you go on to describe those interactions, and maybe you could share some of them with your students about how your eyes were opened through them, just as you were opening their eyes through your experience as a writer.
Well, I would have to say that when I was teaching at UCR, my student population was so diverse that it wasn't me opening their eyes.
Mm-hmm.
It was them opening my eyes. All I was doing was teaching them to spell and punctuate.
Mm-hmm.
They were the ones who had the stories, and the stories that they had were totally fascinating. I remember one of them wrote a story about, and he was Hispanic, and he wrote a story about his family migrating to California, except they couldn't afford for everybody to go in a car or something. Some of them had to walk.
Mm.
So I believe it was the mother and one of her sisters, they took the kids, but the father and a couple of the boys had to walk all the way.
Wow.
And that just blew me away. I really wanted him to turn that into a novel.
Mm-hmm.
So I still hope he does. I don't know if he will. We're not in contact, but it was the same with a lot of my students. A lot of my students had just as interesting stories as that, and it was fascinating.
Well, and also when you were reading, you know, what comes through to me too, and it's also the introduction, and hearing you speak, is the importance of place, about, you know, California itself, and, you know, wanting to wonder or ask you just about that. Like, you moved from Iowa, came to California. What were your sort of first impressions? You as you corrected, as you weren't a Los Angeles native. So it wasn't a homecoming per se.
Right. Iowa was good to me, I have to say.
Mm-hmm.
I really enjoyed my friends that I made in Iowa City at the Writers' Workshop, and the professors that I had there. And then when I got the job at Iowa State, it was a perfect place to raise kids because it was a small town, housing was cheap. A lot of the girls who came off the farm and went to the child development school stuck around to work in the daycare establishments. So there was that. And so it was a really good place to start out my career. But then my husband he had lived in California for a while, and he wanted to come back. He did not want to die in Iowa. He was born in Iowa. He said, I don't want to die here. And he didn't. He hasn't, and he won't. Anyway, so we looked around, and every place was so interesting. You know, it all had also to do with horses, because I was bringing horses with me. Right. So there had to be a place for the horses to be where we could be near them. And so we eventually set upon the Monterey Peninsula and Carmel Valley, and it's been totally great. But I will say, and I love it here. And one of the reasons I love it here is that, you know, you're walking down the street in Monterey, and then 10 minutes later, you're pretty much in the wilds. Mm-hmm. Or you're looking at an incredibly beautiful and expensive house in Carmel, and within 10 minutes, you're in the wilds, you know, or you're by the, or you're on the beach. It's way more diverse in terms of landscape than any place I had been before. And I really love it for that.
You just hear you speak now. There's again a whole the book is a collection of essays, and one of them is about St. Louis, where you grew up,
Yes.
and obviously I think you like many great writers have some very acute powers of observation, and hearing you describe this now, when you're talking about your childhood in St. Louis. And how you would walk, you described walking around, and as you got older, you expanded your neighborhoods that you would walk through. But the details that you're pulling, you're recalling for that essay are very similar to what you just described. You're talking about seeing creeks and the diversity of trees and nature, and
that's true, but it wasn't the same as here. It was. I was impressed when I was a kid. And I love St. Louis. One of the things I like about St. Louis is how weird the names of the streets are. I have a novel at the publisher waiting to be published, and the woman who's the main character lives on a street in St. Louis named Skinker.
What's the origin of that name?
I have no idea. But so there's a lot to be said for St. Louis, but it's been there longer. It's way more humid.
Yeah.
And so it's harder to put up through in the summer. And so it has its virtues, but I love living in California.
Oh, somebody says they know Skinker Boulevard. That's so fantastic.
Another St. Louisan, maybe.
Yeah. Well, let's jump into, I have to I'm going to run out of time if I don't get busy here. You have an essay in here called The Most Important Question. And, it's fantastic. I don't have a copy here. I always like to have books, of the Decameron, but you reference the Decameron, and then Marguerite de Navarre, her Heptameron. And really,
that was an interesting thing for me, because I'd heard of the Decameron because I was a medieval literature major when I was in school. And I decided to read the Decameron, and then lo and behold, I discovered the Heptameron, which was written 200 years later, and it has the same form.
Yeah.
But because it was written during the Reformation, that when the people in the book talk about their experiences, they do it much more philosophically. So you can see the change that's taking place. And the question that Marguerite proposes is, can a woman know true love and retain her virtue? And they're about 78 little essays, 78 references to books and little essays, and they decide that she can't, that it's impossible.
Thumbs down, no, not possible.
And so then I kept going, and here's the Princess of Clèves, who writes, what's the name of that one?
Isn't that the title of, is it Prince? Oh, the story.
Yeah, that's the title of the book, The Princess of Clèves. And that the author of that one, who's also a woman, solves the problem. She figures out how she can do it. And so for me, these issues that the novel takes up and uses plotting and character to solve are ways toward being wise, ways toward learning stuff. And that was really important for me when I was reading and writing 13 Ways of Looking at the Novel.
Well, I think it's central to many of the themes that you explore in these essays. It's not just a defense of the novel, but I think I'll just read two of your quotes, or one of them. Well, one is, good girls read sermons and poetry, smart girls read novels. and then in your discussion of Uncle Tom's Cabin, you kind of say that the novel is inherently political. And then also, I do not believe the novel can be replaced as a vehicle of learning by any other form. And I love it if you could tell us a little bit more, what is it that the novel gives readers or offers readers, I should say?
Well, the thing that the novel offers readers is a story. And we all know that people love stories, from your childhood when you're reading fairy tales and those sort of things. So people love stories. But the great thing about the novel is because it's really long, the author has to have a theory about how the world works. Now, the world could be small or the world could be large, but the author has to have a theory about how the world works and how the characters fit in. And that's been true since the beginning of the novel.
Mm-hmm.
And so as the author is writing the novel, the author is expressing his or her theory, and that gives the reader a way to imagine the world in a logical manner. Now, I might not like some authors' theories, but at least I get to see them.
Mm-hmm.
Other authors' theories I might adore, so one of my favorite authors is Anthony Trollope.
Uh-huh.
And one of his theories is that some people can learn and some people can't. And I always call him the king of ambivalence. And so what he does with his characters, and there's so many of them, is that he gives them problems and they want to do one thing, but then they want to do another thing and they don't know quite what to do. And the novel unties the subtleties of that sort of ambivalence.
Mm-hmm.
My favorite of his novels is He Knew He Was Right. And that's an incredibly long novel. So forewarned is forearmed. But on the one hand, there is the male character who apparently we would say he has obsessional defiant disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And he cannot get along with his wife, and he torments her.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the other hand, there's this older woman character who's been sort of a snot her whole life. And now she's pretty old. She's probably about 50. And in her side of the novel, she actually learns stuff and becomes a more decent person. And so it's a beautiful contrast between these two people one who can't learn and one who has to learn and does learn. And I just love that book.
Well, yeah, Trollope, you also, there's an essay, called "Why Go On?"
Yes.
Sort of about, I'll call it, the longevity of writing. And this is a question I meant to ask later in this conversation,
Okay.
But since you brought him up, that you referenced that he wrote a 225-page novel in 5 weeks when he was 64.
Yes.
You get quotes from David Lodge, Joyce Carol Oates, a lot of very prolific writers. And I guess the question I have is, in your opinion, do writers get better as they get older? You reference that the idea to become more fluent with ideas, and also just a question, well, no, I won't ask that question, but tell me, do writers get better as they get older? Yeah.
I don't know that they get better as they get older. I think that what you do as a reader is you come to understand the complexities of their ideas and their personalities better. But I mean, if you're reading Jane Austen and you're reading Charles Dickens and you're reading Philip Roth, you aren't going to mistake one for the other. But they also are totally curious. And so they keep going and they do different things.
Mm-hmm.
And some of my favorite novels are late ones. For example, Our Mutual Friend is one of Dickens' last novels. It might even be his last published one.
Mm-hmm.
And there is this sense by the time he writes Our Mutual Friend that he really understands the world in a slightly different way than he did earlier.
Mm-hmm.
and that he's interested in more different, slightly different things than he was.
Yeah. What I want to go just so Dickens, God, it's so many questions. I wrote down, pages of questions as if we had 2 hours, But one thing that leaped out at me, I mean, you're Dickens, expert, you were the biography,
Mhm.
I didn't know he was a magazine editor, right? He was
Well, he had his own magazines,
Yeah.
and they were pretty much for publishing his own stuff, but he included other people. He was interested in other people's writing. He was not totally selfish or anything like that. What was really interesting about him was that I think we would diagnose him as having being unable to sit down. He was maybe what is it, a hyperactivity disorder,
ADHD or something.
ADHD, because he loved to walk around. Well, when he walked around in London, he heard so many things because he had excellent hearing that they gave him lots of ideas. And he also learned the nature of all these accents, these different accents that he saw around London. And so one of the great things about Dickens is that his work is much more socially diverse than some of the other authors, like Jane Austen, for example, who I totally love. But because of his explorations of the world that he lived in, he really wanted to include what he saw and heard in his books. And so he expanded the reach of British literature, English literature.
Well, you said that, I mean, I don't know if this was in response to Dickens or your discussion of him, but I wrote down in my notes that Jane, this is for the audience, she wrote, I too find ideas proliferate. So, back to powers of observation. And Dickens was famous, right? He would scan you if you.
He's really famous for that, yeah.
Yeah, but so we talked a little bit about what books get told, stories that get told by whom, and so on. Or you referenced the idea, and I just wanted to, I saw a statistic came out this week from the American Library Association that in 2020 there were 223 titles banned. And then in 2022, there was 2,571 titles banned. That's more than 11x increase. And so how do you, I guess my question is, what's the role of the novel in this controversy? How do you remind people of the importance of reading and writing? And
well, the fact that a book is getting banned reminds the people for whom it's being banned that they better go get one.
Yeah.
The question is not whether they're going to obey. The question is whether they have access to the thing that they would like to get now that they know that it's too interesting for them to read. So one of the things that surprised me when I was reading for 13 Ways of Looking at the Novel, so I was nervous, but I wanted to read the Marquis de Sade. I wanted to read Justine by the Marquis de Sade. And I thought, this really isn't up my alley. It's, we all know what sadistic means. And then I read it, and I discovered that de Sade spent so much time in Justine's head that he had, even though cruel things were happening to her, he had great empathy for what her experience was during this. And I thought, well, that's what the novel does. The novel gives you empathy, and sympathy also, but those are two different things. Sympathy is feelings that align with the feelings of the character, where you say, oh, I don't want that to happen to her. She's such a sweetheart. And empathy is where you see things from the character's point of view, even if you think that character is a total shit. And that's good for us to see things from these nasty characters' point of view, because it teaches us, when we look around, how to look at the people who also are total shits that we happen to know, and to sense how their mind is working.
Oh,
And that could give you a way to stop whatever's going on.
yep.
And I think that's the great virtue of the novel, is that it gives you the interiority of the characters as the author imagines it. And it opens up your sense of human psychology and your sense of what people around you are thinking when they're doing things that you don't understand.
Yep. Well, I mean, I can't believe it. We're already at 101, so we're already over. But I really wanted to ask you to read one more, particularly, it's a great a note to end on, please. I suggested maybe reading the last, I guess it was 2 paragraphs or paragraph and a half of this great book right here.
Okay, I'll start, and then you can tell me to shut up when I'm done, when you think I'm done. I remember when I proposed 1,000 acres to my agent, she said, "Are you kidding me? No one wants to read a novel about farming." But no one was going to stop me. "We'll see," I said, and I just wrote it. That's been the case for all my books, successful or not successful. I wrote the books I wanted to write. I know I've been lucky to be able to write this way. To me as a reader, the greatest thing about the novel, I start sentences this way all the time, but I always say a different thing, is that it gives access to the mind of the writer. Our mutual friend is a perfect example of this. You have access to the mind of this guy, Charles Dickens, prolonged access, 880 pages of access. There is no intermediary between you and this guy's mind. There are no actors, no stage production. To read a book is an act of humanity. It's an act of connection, and it's also an act of freedom.
Yep. Thank you. That's great. The probably like George Costanza, you end on that note or something. I should just be quiet. But so I just before Beth, you want to come back, and then also I wanted to just call out that this is Jane's book, Dangerous Business, one of her historical fiction, and we're gonna be talking about this at the Bay Area Book Festival in 2 weeks. And please go try and track this book down either at the festival or pre-order it this week on the Indie Bookstore Day. So thank you, Jane, and I'll be quiet. Beth.
We've included links to how you can attend Jane's conversation with Blaise. Also, I think Jane, you have 2 appearances at the Bay Area Book Festival coming up.
Yeah, one for each book.
Fantastic. So we will send everyone links to that. A couple of questions for you. In fact, it's kind of a perfect segue. Geeta, who is looking forward to attending the Bay Area Book Festival, is shifting to writing women's fiction. Her protagonist is an Indian American woman.
Mm-hmm.
She's currently chewing on whether or not to italicize words in Hindi, etc., or footnotes or endnotes in the glossary. She's noted the convention is changing, hence the conundrum. She wanted to respect the reader and respect her own heritage. No easy decisions. Thoughts? Do you have any thoughts on that? And she asks, should she channel your quote, "The novel is inherently political"?
She certainly will. I would like for her to channel that quote. The language question is one that the publisher always has an opinion about. When I wrote Perestroika in Paris, which is about a horse who escapes from Auteuil racecourse and goes into Paris, I originally wanted the animals to talk in English and the people to talk in French. And my publisher said, and I thought that was funny, my publisher said, no way, everybody had to talk in English. So I think the thing to do is to suggest, I would turn the manuscript in with some of the stuff that you want in Hindi or whatever language it is that you're using. And then have a talk about it with the publisher. You could put footnotes in, but it does give the text more authenticity. So why not try it and see what happens?
Karen asks, can you give an example? This is a gigantic question. Can you give an example of your theory of the world for this new book, or any book, but to keep it
For this book.
for this book? Yes, the questions that matter most.
I think for me, the theory of the world for this book is don't shut up. Speak up, keep saying what you mean, but also in some sense, add a little sense of humor, because that sort of lowers the aggression threshold. And I guess the last part is hope for the best, because that's what I think we're doing now. We're looking around ourselves and seeing various things happen that in some ways seem surprising and in some ways seem, repetitive. And we're just hoping for the best. But there seem to be good things going on, so I'm not gonna say, oh no, it's not good. Sometimes I want to say that, but I think there are reasons for hope.
Well, how about last question? Speaking of good things going on, can you recommend, are there any contemporary authors, new authors, people doing work that's really exciting to you that we might not know about and you would like to amplify and have us look into?
Oh dear, I have to be prepared for that one. So maybe what I'll do is I will send you a little list.
Oh, we love that.
Wow, that would be great. We'll
Yeah.
all right. If Jane Smiley sends us a little list, we'll add it as a little addendum to the interview when we post it online, and we will check those out. Because I'm curious. Who do you think is cool? We're very excited to speak with you. Who do you think's awesome? With that, thank you so much for going over time and for taking the time to connect with us today, as well as Jane came and signed books at the Los Angeles Times Festival of Books. She will be taking time for us at the Bay Area Book Festival. We are so very grateful. Jane, to you.
That's what I should do for the Bay Area Book Festival. Remember to ask me that question, or whoever's interviewing.
Yep.
Ask me the question about what books I recommend, and that's when I'll answer it.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Folks, before you go, I do want to make sure to invite you to join us next week, May 3rd, for a conversation with thriller writer Rachel Housel Hall. She wrote the short fiction piece in the current issue that is gripping. She also has a number of really exciting thrillers out. She will be joining us on May 3rd in conversation with our books editor, David L. Ulan. But again, thank you everyone to coming. Thanks, Blaise. And thank you so much, Jane Smiley.
Oh, it was lots of fun.
Jane.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
See you
all.
soon.
Take care.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.